Well, what a fantastic closing plenary session. I wanted to extend my thanks to Jim, to Sarah, to Jane, and to Gabriella for a very thought-provoking panel session of the different programs and initiatives and ways that we're all trying to develop entrepreneurial capabilities in the difficult sectors of deep tech, medicine, and the other, what's the other word people are using for it? Hard tech today, but to address important societal and global challenges. Advance, please. So we've learned a lot of lessons over the past 2 days, and Sarah and I are going to try to pull some of these together and to come to a call to action for those of you who are here with us who have seen all of these very thought-provoking discussions, have participated in them, have contributed to them. And one of the lessons that we've been hearing repeatedly is that trying to create the conditions for long-term impact from science, trying to address societal challenges, trying to create value, means unlearning some of the things that we conventionally hold to be true about entrepreneurship. Advance, please.
So one of the truths that we tend to hold is this idea of the lone entrepreneur that breaks down every barrier themselves and already saw themselves as this disruptor. And yet what we've heard over the last 2 days and from this community and what we've seen is that this is not something that we do on our own. Entrepreneurs exist within a complex ecosystem, and each one of those stakeholders has a significant role to play. Advance, please. And what we've also seen is that a lot of people who don't necessarily see themselves as entrepreneurs, we've heard of the scientist entrepreneur, we've heard of the reluctant entrepreneur in some of the sessions. They may have that mindset to want to make impact with what they're doing, but it takes their environment and their community to instill in them the sense of resilience and self-efficacy and the imagination of what they can do with these kind of opportunities that really turns someone into an entrepreneur and helps drive those entrepreneurial capabilities. And so it's important for us to realize that this idea of someone you either are or are not an entrepreneur is something that we need to challenge directly and that we need to take into account in our programming, our incubation, and in our universities. Next, please. But even if we're going to do that, the other thing that we've heard is this is the most open of open systems. And sometimes you get the outcome you're looking for. Sometimes what you get is university ventures or collaborations. And sometimes what you get is rockstar scientists that change the DNA of your university. And sometimes you get entrepreneurial grad students who may or may not work on anything that you told them to. You get translational labs and PIs that are all of a sudden interested in the case of Gabriella's work, working with each other and working across labs, and others that are forming industry partnerships they hadn't anticipated before. And out of these programs, you don't just get the venture entrepreneurs, but you get those policy shapers and those people who create bridges from universities to industry. And those are just as valuable outcomes. And we need to be counting those outcomes as valuable in the same way we create ventures and venture capital invested. Because at the end of the day, this all comes down to regional absorptive capacity and a more thriving ecosystem across everything we do.
Another conventionally held entrepreneurial truth is that you can pivot and adapt quickly and get some sort of beta product out into the market right away. And with some of the challenges we're talking about, with some of the very big impact we want to make, and that research hospitals and research universities are uniquely positioned to do, is actually quite a long game. And so when you look at the time from the first invention until it's actually out making an impact in society and in the world, these are long time frames, 5, 10, 15 years. Advance, please. And yet some of our very impactful innovations have developed over that time period and are very worthwhile supporting. This is an example from a paper with John Thomas and Jim Utterback, both who participated in this symposium today, where we looked at examples of multidisciplinary invention and the timeframes that it happened under and the conditions that were necessary for it to happen. And in this case, we look at the development of Doxil, the first FDA-approved nano drug. And it involves a series of inventions. This happened mainly at the Babraham Institute in Cambridge. But now today, as we respond to developing a vaccine for the coronavirus, one of the options is looking at liposome-delivered vaccines. And this is an invention that happened over decades and took an environment that was conducive to it happening. Advance, please. And so it brings us back to the points that we heard this morning from Professor Ashish Arora, and also from the kind of the book and the research of Professor Mariana Mazzucato, who are questioning, what is the role that the public sector, that government, that policymakers, that universities need to play in these breakthrough inventions that are, developments that we may think of as being the private sector, but really they usually just took it the last step of the way. Next, please. So who is going to step up? This is a conversation that we want to have, and that was in a very thought-provoking way, brought up by and stimulated by Professor Ashish Arora and the discussion this morning. What can universities do to strengthen the translation of their research? What can policymakers do? What can firms do? What can scientists themselves do? Next, please.
And finally, it's important to realize that all of these are systems and a holistic support is required. When I lived in England more years ago than I'm going to admit now, we were constantly revolving through the sexiest animal, which was the gazelle, and then it was the big gorilla, and then it was the unicorn. And all of these things had all kinds of government investment going in. And then all of a sudden, there was this realization that we stopped paying attention to the early stage of the funnel, and everything dried up, and you had to start again. And so realizing that you don't get these large firms, you don't get these collaborations if no one is aware of these possibilities. Once you have awareness, you need to be able to step in with that early stage education that doesn't scare scientists away from the world of entrepreneurship, and then incubation that actually understands this long tail game and what it takes to support a very different kind of venture where lean startup principles aren't necessarily going to work. And then moving on to making sure the appropriate funding is in place, partnerships are in place to get that scale. But scale doesn't happen if you don't have all of these other pieces. Next, please.
And so both Sarah and I, as co-chairs of this conference, and the organizing committee discussed this last week as well, is what kind of calls to action do we have that can take this community that's come together and think about how we can help create the change we want to see. And every player in each of our ecosystems has a role to play. Next, please. So first, a call to all of you that are academics. Choose one person, at least, from this symposium to follow up with. And think about what programs may be missing at your own institution. Ask yourself if you're making enough use of the ones that do exist, or which ones you could create. And importantly, as we've heard repeatedly in this symposium over the past 2 days, embrace the mess. Even when things are unorthodox and you need to try something in a new way, that's part about being an innovator. Next, please. And please, by all means, academics, policymakers, practitioners, please help contribute to the white paper. Many of you already have through your comments in the discussions, through your the creative coffee and the notes that were taken there, and through the papers that you've written. But do you have other papers and the topics that you've been stimulated to think about during these discussions that you'd like to recommend to the rest of the community? Are there other programs that you think we should know about? Please send your papers and suggestions to the RDM-SIMP email, rdmsimp@sfu.ca. Next, please.
Absolutely. And also make sure to put in your papers to those special issues that we talked about earlier today. For universities, first off, please start aligning your incentives. This has come out in Creative Coffee. This has come out in our panel sessions. This has come out in parallel sessions. There are a lot of ways to disincent your scientist entrepreneurs and your students from becoming more entrepreneurial. And so making sure that everything from TPC to rewards to how things are acknowledged and celebrated line up with the outcomes that you want. Hold yourself accountable over the long term. As we heard from other programs, the panel just now, these are long-term games and long-term plays. And setting up this ecosystem can take 10, 15 years. But realizing that you can step back and have those intermediary measures, it's really important to say we are making progress. We just know this is a long step. And let's be fair, most of the universities have been around for a while. We do know how to play the long game. Align with your stakeholders and make sure you're talking to your community. As Scott talked about right at the beginning, the idea of bringing your stakeholders into alignment of one big vision is a place where the university really can play a role in creating that shared vision. Next, please.
For policymakers, think about helping to create, think about the challenges brought forward by Professor Shishirora and by the work of Professor Mariana Mazzucato, amongst others that have been here today. And think about creating a portfolio of early stage opportunities to be ready, to be resilient to global challenges, to think about climate change, to think about COVID-19, to think about food security. In the case of climate crisis, 11,000 scientists have agreed that it's not just regulations and political solutions that we need. We also need climate innovation. And so where are those ideas coming from? They're coming from universities and national research labs, and they require innovation policy and support and entrepreneurial capability to get from the lab towards the market, to be that portfolio of opportunities that can then be taken up to respond to challenges. Think about increasing universities' abilities to protect and advance high-risk research. So there's a number of innovation policy challenges from this. And also, one we often hear is, don't just think about the technology part, think also about the market development and the scaling challenges ahead of you. Next, please.
So for spin-out firms, and I hope there are at least a few aspiring entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs right now in our audience, take a few moments with your team to get back and to reevaluate your early decisions and see if these proceedings have revealed any new paths, partnerships, or strategies. One of the great things about being a startup in a university is this access to these champions and to this knowledge that a lot of spin-out companies and a lot of small ventures don't get until years later. Make sure to identify your university champions, who in the university is interested in working with you and can support you, both at your university and at other universities. Clearly, this is a collective effort. And look at the programs offered by universities. Particularly right now, we're seeing opportunities for subsidized student internships, projects, research grants. All of these projects and all of these are available. So make sure you take advantage of those things. Next, please.
And then to large firms, think about your absorptive capacity. Think about the long-term adaptability of your business. Where is the world going to? And how can you have a portfolio of options that you could potentially develop, learn about, and acquire? That comes from collaborating with universities and with university researchers in terms of developing the talent that's going to help you do that and be those bridges. Think where science grads could play a role, not just in the research lab, but also in leading innovation initiatives and being that bridge. Next, please.
And finally, for incubators, which have been one of the intermediaries that we focused on today. And I know that there are a number of people leading incubators that are in the audience today. So one thing to ask yourself is, are you running appropriate programming for scientists? Or are you running Lean Startup? Lean Startup is absolutely fine for those things where you're supposed to move fast and break things. But we don't want people to break large healthcare systems or the education system. That's something that would be harder to clean up. So making sure that there's a portfolio of programs that are available that are specific to the long-term timelines, funding requirements, needs, and also understanding the unique community that's involved in science-based ventures. Remember that not everything is opportunity recognition. It's really easy to say, well, the market isn't there. In 10 years, will the market be there? Will the need be there? Will the societal need be there? So does this market exist is not as important as will this market exist and will this need exist? And then do your mentors include scientist entrepreneurs? Does that group of people you have to depend on to lead these young researchers and these first-time entrepreneurs through this journey understand what it's like to be a person who spent most of their time in the lab and now wants to make impact? Next, please. So with that, it's time to say thank you first to everyone who's joined us over the last few days. We don't know the analytics for today, but yesterday we had 290 different unique sign-ins from 38 countries and 22 time zones. So it's nice to know that across the globe, this community is uniting to address these challenges, which gives us a lot of hope for actually creating those conditions for impact. And thank you so much to our sponsors today. We've had the Beatty School of Business has provided so much support. Our platinum sponsors, Fulcrum and SFU Innovates, and we're very proud once more to be an agent of the Discovery Foundation who has helped us bring the next generation of tech entrepreneurs to this symposium and to get them to meet all of the wonderful people who were with them in Creative Coffee and throughout all of the sessions. And then the last big thank you is to the volunteers, to everyone who's been working on the back end, and to our incredible international committee of support of conference organizers. So I wish you could see roaring applause from across the globe. But for now, I want to make sure we specially spotlight Dr. Lawrence Dooley, Dr. Ricardo Fini, Dr. Leticia Mortera, Dr. Alberto Dominin, Dr. Joseph Zhao, who I hope is asleep right now because he's in China, Dr. Julio Ferrigno, Dana Higgins, Joanne Griffiths, Ben Chow, and Andrew Park. In 2 days, we've had an incredible amount of excitement, of encouragement, of inspiration. And these are all the people who have been working tirelessly for a year to make sure that we could do this and who hung on when we found out nothing that we originally planned was going to go how we wanted it to. But at the end of the day, that's entrepreneurial mindset, that's capability, and that is the kind of behavior and innovation that we're hoping for from this community. So thank you so much for monitoring that, for mirroring that for our community. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. Please do continue to send in contributions for the white paper, for the papers that you want us to include. And let's continue to keep this conversation going because there's so much more to do. But we know the impact of this community can have, and it will be global and it will be amazing. So to everyone who's stayed with us, thank you so much for coming. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and sweet dreams to all of you.
Indeed.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to the wonderful chairs. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Alicia
Leticia.
and Sarah. Thank you. Thank you, everybody in Vancouver and around the world.
Thanks so much.